With Titan Quest II's early access right around the corner, I wanted to put together a video of all of the stuff you future heroes will need to know. In it, we're going to cover the world, enemies, loot, progression, and all of the in-betweens you need to know to slice and chop your way through the game. Let's go ahead and let's jump in and get started. So what is it? What are we talking about? Titan Quest II. So in Titan Quest II, you are going to return to the classic mythology-inspired setting of Titan Quest I and go toe-to-toe with legendary monsters as you journey across a fantastical reimagining of ancient Greece. Now, our primary enemy is Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, and she is completely out of control. She's corrupting the threads of fate and condemning all of those who oppose her to eternal punishment, including you, the player. So you need to take up your weapon, fight alongside gods, and change fate itself in order to stop Nemesis, free those who's punished, and weave your own epic tale. So as you go through the game, what we know so far is that you're going to be accompanied by Arion. This is going to be your guide through Titan Quest II. This is a divine horse that once belonged to Heracles, but is trapped in a small charm that the main character keeps with them. So one thing I did want to talk about is that this game will launch into early access first. It's entering early access in winter 2024-2025. Since we're in 25, I'm going to go ahead and say this is probably the year that we're going to be looking at. And this should mean relatively in the next few months that we should be actually getting early access to this game. They're going to be following a similar path to Path of Exile 2, where the game will launch into early access first with more content via updates following that. Now, I wanted to lead with this because I don't want people to feel that they were led astray or tricked into buying an early access product, so please just beware. What we will get in winter 25 will not be the 1.0 completely finished product. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's jump in starting with classes. So there isn't a select this class to begin type of thing in Titan Quest II. Instead, just like in Titan Quest I and Grim Dawn, you will combine two masteries to form your class. At the beginning, you'll select one single mastery, and then shortly into the campaign, you'll unlock the other. Now, the devs wanted to make sure you weren't too far into the game before your second mastery, and thus, you hate the character you've built. We've all been there. You pick the wrong thing. Why do you think Grim Tools are a thing in Grim Dawn, where you can go back and you can reset your masteries and choose something different? Because you want to play around, see what happened, and kind of figure that out. So I'm curious to see if we'll be able to roll back masteries or if they're going to follow the same path as Grim Dawn, where once you select what you have, that's kind of it. Their overarching main goal is to make you feel like you're a hero blessed by the gods themselves. You're possessing superhuman powers, and improving and growing your powers will be a journey, but it will be necessary in order to survive against Nemesis. Now, to start, there are going to be 3 masteries available in early access: Earth, Storm, Warfare. Now, more will be coming in future updates, but these are the ones to kind of get us kicked off. Now, as for the actual mechanics, you're going to be able to equip a maximum of 10 skills on your ability bar. This will allow for you to kind of create whatever you want to do. You can really kind of fine-tune this to fit whatever you want to play as. You can have a primary damage skill and a handful of support skills. You can have several primary damage skills with only one support skill. It's really you. It's whatever you want to play as. But Titan Quest II will greatly reward you when you figure out skill synergies. But they will also cater to those who heavily invest in a more limited toolkit. We'll get into combat here in a little bit, but I did want to put that out there. So let's take a quick look at each mastery and what it offers. So in terms of Earth, many of your abilities and modifiers are going to revolve around setting the battlefield on fire and engulfing your enemies in flames. You'll also be able to utilize fire in a controlled manner, or completely let go and just blow everything up, even sacrificing your own health in favor of maximum destruction. You can cause enemies to burn over time if you're a big dot type playstyle, but if you're wanting to do something a little bit different, you don't have to go into fire. Instead, you can command earth and rock to shake things up a little bit, such as causing earthquakes with your fissure skill. From a Storm perspective, Storm is going to grant you area of effect abilities that regularly deal damage, and then you can also modify abilities to electrocute enemies on hit, and fighting with the power of Storm will result in a battlefield full of thunder and lightning. You can use ice abilities to chill or freeze your enemies, giving you a little bit more crowd control over what happens on the battlefield. You can also utilize lightning to shock and electrocute your enemies, which will lock them in place. Then we have Warfare. So Warfare is going to kind of feature attacks for all weapon types, giving you a lot of freedom to really kind of design your build, what you want to play as. In the demo, we got to see a Ice Warrior, so somebody who played as a warrior but used a staff to cast spells or use ice shards. This mastery also includes abilities specifically designed for ranged weapons other than magic staves. You could be, using a bow and arrow, those type of things. Now, support abilities for Warfare help with getting into and staying in close combat. You have like leap into battle, you can stun enemies with a powerful stomp, all of these different things. And remember, you pick 2 of these, so it's not like you have to pick one and stick with it. You can combine Earth and Warfare, Storm and Earth, etc. You can do all sorts of different things, so keep that in mind as you go into this. Now, in one of the blog posts, the devs mentioned that you do want to be thoughtful when picking your abilities. They want you to think through how to form those interconnections between your 2 masteries. Remember, I talked about synergies. They're ensuring this via what they're calling global mechanics that all masteries will feature in some form, such as base abilities, modifiers. For example, you could build up status stacks with a Warfare ability and then consume those stacks with a Storm ability for a more powerful effect. So combining your masteries, balancing kind of the use case, the generation, the spenders, all of those type of things between them is going to be important. So that's a look at what masteries will have in early access. Again, more coming down the pipe later, but let's talk about the world. So the world of Titan Quest II is all handcrafted. There's no procedural generation used at this time, and with that, each playthrough will look and feel the same, letting players sort of build a mental map of how the world is laid out. For me, this is both a pro and a con. I feel like if things are procedurally generated, you never really know what's going to come around the corner, but at the same time, having everything sort of handcrafted, you know where you need to go and when you need to go there. So from a time commitment type of perspective, it might be better to have handcrafted, whereas procedural, it lends itself to randomness. So maybe we'll see some of that in the future, but for now, just know no procedural generation used this time in the world. So quests are going to be your main thing of what you're going to be doing in Titan Quest II. Makes sense, it's in the name. There are 2 types of quests in the game, Fated quests and World quests. Fated quests are the main storyline quests that will ferry you through the game on your path to defeat Nemesis. World quests are discovered through exploration and by talking to NPCs, which is a huge thing we need to talk about. The devs have consistently hammered home the point where they want players to explore the game and not just rush through the main storyline. They want you to flip over rocks, they want you to explore caves, follow a trail that's off the main road. All of these things have the potential to lead to a world quest that will reward you handsomely. By putting on blinders, you will miss out on tons of content, they guarantee it. Now, besides quests, there are also things called exploration events. These are small encounters like a talking jar, a statue of Heracles surrounded by offering bowls, an encounter with a special commander. Now, these are not tracked in your quest log, but instead, they're found and completed while you're out exploring, furthering the point I made before about spending time actually exploring the world and paying attention to your surroundings. Now, just like any good action RPG, there are also tons of chests, breakables, lootables, all scattered across the world, so make sure to break and loot those. There are fast travel points, known as waypoints, throughout the world. It's a big world. Getting around is going to be a normal thing for action RPG players. You're going to unlock these waypoints and be able to travel between them. So let's talk about enemies. The world of Titan Quest II is a dangerous place. It had to be, otherwise it'd be pretty boring to players, obviously. Now, the game features multiple factions of enemies for us to discover. We can learn their strengths and their weaknesses, and obviously we can kill them for loot. So first we have the Ichthyans. These are monstrous fishmen that you'll encounter very early in the game. They do have some good synergy. They have a good balance of attack, defense, and support. And again, we'll talk about that here in a moment. Next, we have the wildlife. These are creatures of the world, such as boars, griffins, hippocampus, all of those different things. So just generally creatures. And then we have skeletons, undead creatures that possess death and cold elements. So be aware for those. But that's not all, you see. So mobs in Titan Quest II aren't just groups of enemies thrown together that sort of fit into a faction. They're a cohesive unit that works in synergy to make your life hell, frankly. You have healers and buffers who are going to empower and restore the unit. You have crowd control experts that will ensnare, slow, or freeze you, making you an easy target. And then you have heavy hitting brutes who are just built to absolutely take off chunks of health. And then at the center of these units, you may find what they call a leader. This is a unit that's a commander of that faction, and they're stronger and more potent than any other units. So we can see that in this clip, the devs are fighting a skeleton leader. This is part of one of those side quest exploration events. This skeleton leader pops up, and he is a challenge for them to overcome. Now, my question is, are these similar to elites? Is it just kind of, a synonym? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to find out. Either way, we want to make sure to take note of these if they're on the battlefield. So shifting to a different type of enemy, let's talk bosses. We haven't seen these, but they did talk about them a little bit in one of their blogs. So the dev vision for bosses is the following. They want to provide well-telegraphed attacks that the player can learn. They want to make these encounters challenging, but learnable and rewarding. And whenever you die, no matter to a boss or to a minion, wherever in the world, the encounter will reset and you'll respawn in town. So keep that in mind. So anything you killed between the waypoint and the boss, or the enemy that killed you, will remain dead. So that's good. You're not going to have to go and try to refight through tons and tons of enemies, but whatever killed you will restore back to full health. So keep that in mind. However, when you die, you can use a waypoint and you'll have access to a temporary portal that will be on your dead body. This will allow you to go right back to where you died. It's highly convenient. I love that they added this in here. The portal will close afterwards. You cannot continue to reuse it, but anytime you die, you'll be able to return to the spot where you died instead of having to run all the way back to wherever you passed. Now, the last point, if you do want to crank up the difficulty of the game, you can invoke something called rituals. We don't know much about this yet, but there are harder settings if you want to make your life, well, more difficult. So let's briefly touch on combat. We talked about a few other things. So combat in this game aims to be more thoughtful and slow than previous generations of ARPGs, where the whole game was just about zooming as fast as possible. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. This is most likely going to be achieved at some point, right? Players are going to zoom. That's just the way it is. But the developers want encounters to be challenging rather than just a speed bump. So with that, let's talk about some of the tools that you're going to have in your toolkit to overcome some of these group units, the cohesion, the bosses, whatever we talked about in the last section. So one, you're going to have the standard health and mana. These are basic, you're going to have them. You'll also have rage as a resource for some skills, status effects as a potential resource, prerequisite for some spenders. Then you'll also have potions for recovering health and mana. So these will be interchangeable in your inventory. We haven't seen upgraded versions of them in game yet, but we have seen them in the inventory, so we know it's a thing. Now, your masteries and skills will have some synergy to blend together two playstyles. We talked about this earlier. Whether it's the Ice Warrior that the devs showed off or something completely different. You will have skills that exist in one mastery that can be used to generate rage, for example, and then a skill in another mastery that can consume that rage to deal an effect or give you a buff, etc. This makes for some interesting potential for builds, just like in Titan Quest 1 and Grim Dawn. But if you don't want to synergize, you can just go pure, just into a certain skill or mastery, and do just fine. It's all about finding whatever works best for you. And we talked about enemies and how dangerous certain combinations are, so you will need to keep an eye out for telegraphs and prioritize certain enemy types over others. So what does all this combat get you? Loot, and lots of loot. Loot in Titan Quest 2 does not reinvent the wheel. Instead, it follows a traditional formula that we've seen in Titan Quest 1, in Grim Dawn, and just about every other action RPG that we've seen. Items are a combination of procedurally generated and handcrafted, and they'll follow the normal rarity wheel, with higher rarities sporting more affixes and uniques bringing special effects into your build. So let's go over the rainbow of rarities. We have white, that's going to be common. Rare is going to be yellow. Magical is going to be blue. Infrequent is going to be green. Uniques, which are handcrafted, will be purple. And then we have faction items. These were not shown, but they were mentioned by the developers. So not entirely sure everything is going to go into those right now or what color those will be, but they will be in the game. Each item will also fall into one of three families for that item type. These are going to be different for each type of item, but they did give an example of what a two-handed axe would be, for instance. You'll have a light two-handed axe, which is fast and crit focused. You have a medium one, which is a balance, and you have heavy, which is slow, but also very hard hitting. Now these families also determine the white innate affix that's shown on the tooltip. So you might have a liking of, hey, I really want to go light two-handers for all of my stuff because I love what that kind of does for my build. Or you might be somebody that's like, I don't really care about speed, but I want the most damage as possible, so we're going to go heavy. Now, before we move into the next section, I did want to mention crafting because this was brought up. This will not be available in early access, but it will be added later and monsters will drop their specific materials to use within this system. So I did want to get that out there because I know there'll be questions about it. The devs mentioned it, so I wanted to throw it in here as a bullet point. Now, slaying and collecting loot obviously is cool, but what happens when you level up? So let's talk progression. Whenever you level up in Titan Quest 2, you're going to receive a skill point and an attribute point. Now, skill points, these are powerful because it allows you to specialize in a skill and invest in upgrading its capacity. Capacity lets you equip new or more modifiers, changing how that skill works. So for instance, in the gameplay demo, the devs invested points into a skill called Ice Shards. This is a skill that launches a handful of ice spikes toward enemies, and by investing points, they were able to add things like Pierce to those shards. They were able to increase their damage, increase their count. The same thing goes for Leap. By adding points into the Leap skill, they were able to unlock and equip modifiers that increased rage generation or cooldown. Now, all of these modifiers can be adjusted freely, but the question I do still have is whether or not we can remove points from skills whenever we please, or if these are a permanent investment. I'm not entirely sure, but that is something that I saw them do, but I never really saw them pull points out of it. So, more to come. Now, when it comes to attributes, we have 4 primary ones to invest your points into, and then 3 minor ones that are influenced by their surrounding primary nodes. For primary attributes, we have agility, which affects light armor and fast weapons. We have might, which allows you to equip heavy armor and use two-handers. Knowledge, which is built for mages, using robes and staves. And vigor, which is used to increase your health. Then the minor nodes that are scattered throughout are fitness, resolve, and cunning. Fitness provides strike and pierce damage, resolve increases your cold and fire damage, and cunning increases poison and lightning damage. So with these, you want to make sure to invest your points into whatever primary nodes are going to help you, but then also be aware of the minor nodes that are going to be influenced as well. So for instance, if you want to be, again, a warrior that uses magic, then you want to make sure to invest points into might and knowledge. That way, 1, you'll increase your heavy armor and two-hander abilities. You'll increase your stave abilities, but then you'll also gain a big bump to resolve, which is going to increase your cold and fire damage. Now, if you want to be a lightning mage, it's going to be something different. You might go knowledge and agility. That way you can increase your lightning damage while also taking care of some poison damage if you want to go that direction. So there are going to be different ways to build your character, kind of spend those points and figure out what best works for you. But guys, that's everything that we know so far. The outstanding questions I have are end game. What does that look like? Replayability, is there going to be a new game plus? What does the service model look like after this? Is this a one-time purchase like Titan Quest 1 that comes with DLC? Are they going to have a league or a seasonal mechanic? I'm not entirely sure. Doubtful, but maybe. But I want to hear from you guys. 1, what questions do you guys have? 2, what do you guys think about Titan Quest 2 so far? And 3, what did you learn from this video that you didn't know about? Because I'm trying to make these as useful and valuable to you guys as possible. And the more I learn, the more I can help you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.